this is Tony Blazer back with another video for the Motocross Vault here on YouTube. And for this one, what we're going to do is take a look back at the 1988 Kawasaki motocross lineup. In the 80s at the time, it was not uncommon to see manufacturers redo their bikes every couple of years, sometimes even every other year or even every year in the case of Honda. In the early 80s, they were revamping the CRs every year, which is pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. But in 1988, Kawasaki took all their bikes, 80 and up, and redid them. The 80, the 125, the 250, and the 500 were all new that year, and pretty big changes all across the board. In most cases, a pretty big improvement too. They made a lot of really important improvements that year. Some things weren't better than 87, but for the most part, the bikes were pretty well improved overall. We're going to take a look at all the machines. Just a quick little look back like I did with the Honda CRs a little bit ago. So if you like this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe and ding that little bell to get updated when we do another one. And I hope you enjoy it. This is the 1988 Kawasaki motocross lineup. As I said before, the entire model lineup was revised here in '88, and that included the 80. The Kawasaki KX80 was a pretty great bike at the time. This was really the first machine that Kawasaki kind of found success with in the motocross realm. In the early 80s, the KX80 and the KX60 were pretty much the best bikes you could buy in the 80cc and 60cc class, and they dominated racing for the first few years of the decade. And that kind of was the first one that kind of cracked that code here for Kawasaki. In '84, they added the 125 that ended up kicking everybody's butt, and then the 250 and 500 started really coming on towards the end part of the decade. But in '88 here, the KX80 got a complete revision. There was an all-new frame, all-new bodywork. The motor was majorly redesigned. It added a new piggyback shock, which was a shock that had a integrated reservoir into the back of it. Prior to this, most of the reservoirs were remotely located and connected by like a braided steel line, a hose. Problem with those were they could fail, they could get cut, a lot of times they just blow off the reservoir. So the integrated piggyback style was more reliable. This is the first year for the rear disc brake on the KX80, which was a big improvement in terms of braking performance. The drum worked pretty well. These drums for the time weren't terrible brakes, but if you got them wet, they kind of went away and they tended to squeak and overheat far easier than the disc did. The bodywork here was redesigned. The bike's a little larger overall. In '88, this was the bike with the largest ergonomics. So if you were a kid who was kind of pushing the limits of what you would fit on an 80, this was the way to go. It was much more roomy ergonomic-wise than like a YZ80 would have been at the time. The CR kind of fit in the middle, the RM kind of fit in the middle a little bit, and the KX was on the large side, the YZ at the smaller side. Like I said, it had front and rear disc brakes. This is the first 80 to feature that in the class. The motor didn't have a power valve. This was not uncommon for the time. Most of the other 80s didn't. In fact, all of them in 1988, none of them had a power valve yet. Honda had retired the ATAC, the ATAC, in 1986. The engine did have a reed valve intake, but like I said, it was not a case redesign. The case reed was still on some 125s, but most of the 80s in 1988 did not have a case reed either. The KX's motor was pretty good overall. The bike provided the most top-end power of any of the 80s in 1988. The RM had more kind of grunt. The CR had more mid-range. The KX was kind of a top-end only motor. It wasn't the most successful of these. Like I said, some of the earlier ones were probably better motorcycles. A lot of the magazines didn't really care for the ergonomics this year too. It was picked like third out of all the 80s in '88 by most of the magazines. But pretty good bike. Like I said, if you were a bigger kid, the KX80 was a good way to go. One interesting thing you'll notice here, the 80 actually has the blue side plates, and international Kawasaki's in '88 got blue side panels. In fact, some of these early brochures and stuff show the blue side panels. I think here on the KX125 one has it as well. The European bikes kept those. The actual ones that came to America here didn't get them except in the 80. 80 is the only one that kept the blue. I really liked that look. It was unique. Thought it looked pretty cool. Like I said, the 125, 500, and 250 didn't get it for some reason. I don't know why. Kawasaki USA decided to change their mind at the last minute, I guess. But anyway, there's a unique look to the bike and kind of gives it a different look here. '88's the only year they used it. One last little thing here to mention about the KX80 for 1988 is the availability of a big wheel model here. These models were pretty popular in Europe. They had a separate class for them in the early 80s, so you'll see the European versions of even Honda CRs and stuff we didn't have here. They did offer a big wheel version. But in the US, Kawasaki was the first one to offer this. I think '87 was the first year we had the big wheel model, and for '88, this is the only 80 available in a big wheel model. So if you wanted this, if you were, like I said, a bigger kid that was kind of not big enough for 125, but too big for an 80, you could get the KX80, which had a bigger chassis anyway, and then with the big wheel option, it certainly was probably a better choice for you. Next up in the lineup is the all-new KX125 for 1988. Much like the 80, the 125 featured an all-new chassis this year. You can see a difference in appearance greatly with the switch to the green paint from silver. Kind of, I really prefer this look to the silver. Definitely brightens up the look a little bit of the motorcycle. All the body work was new. The bike continued to use a single-sided radiator, which was unique to the KX125. Early on, a lot of the manufacturers had different ideas on what the best setup for radiators were. Yamaha had them up on the handlebar, and Suzuki had a big single radiator, kind of like the 97 Hondas. But Kawasaki kind of stuck to this single-sided radiator, much like an 80 for many years. This was actually the last body design that had it. It looks pretty good on the one side, but on the other side with the no radiator, I always thought it looked kind of funny. The motor was all new this year. It switched to a case redesign, give it a little better flow. There's a brand new crescent slide carburetor, 35 millimeter crescent slide on this motor. The switch to the case reed also included a carbon fiber reeds, which were pretty trick in 1988. That was a pretty big deal. The motor itself had an all-new KIPS design. The Kawasaki integrated power valve system was altered to include a new center port exhaust valve for the KIPS system. This was done to give it a little more mid and top end power and give you a little better control in the exhaust port timing. Basically the power valve design in the Kawasaki was kind of a combination of what Yamaha had done with their Yamaha power valve system and what Honda had done with the ATAC. It featured both a variable exhaust valve port and also an exhaust resonance chamber. And basically the kind of design that showed itself to be the most efficient on two-strokes. Basically all two-strokes still use kind of something similar to what the KIPS did on this original design. This motor was really good mid-range punch, not a rocket ship by any means. I know Motocross Action liked it. Some other people thought it was kind of slow. It wasn't really as fast on top as a motor like the CR125, but definitely more potent than the 87 motor, which was, I actually had an 87 KX125. It was okay. It was not super fast, but decent little motorcycle. Of all the changes made for 88, the biggest improvement was probably in the front forks. In 1987, all the full-size Kawasaki's had a set of damper rod style forks from Kiaba that were pretty grim. They weren't very good at all. In 1988, though, they went to a work-style cartridge design. These 43 millimeter KYB forks were excellent. Honda, prior to this in 87, had pretty much had a monopoly on the best forks in motocross. And like I said, Yamaha and Kawasaki with their damper rod forks were way behind. In 88, though, everybody in the class had cartridge forks, and the Kawasaki versions were excellent. They were super plush, very, very well controlled, excellent forks. Out back, the shock was also well received. Most people really, really liked the suspension combination in 1988. The bike handled pretty well. Wasn't by any means a shredder, kind of a middle-of-the-road handler that most people liked, but nobody was blown away with. Just like the 125, the all-new KX250 featured a redesigned chassis with all-new bodywork. This was a pretty big departure in terms of the way the bike felt. In 1987, the KX250 had actually been very slim. The tank was very narrow. The bike had kind of a really, actually one of the narrowest layouts in the class. For 88, the tank was larger and it had a little more of a droop here. You can see it's supposed to lower the center of gravity by carrying the fuel a little bit lower, but the tank was much fatter, much wider. Gave the bike a big and bulky feel. I did not particularly like this. A good buddy of mine had a KX250, and I did not care for the feel of this thing. And I had an 89 the year after this. The tank was a little slimmer, but still big. Basically feels like a much larger motorcycle. Big difference after riding the 87, jumping on the 88. Now, one area where the 88 did make big strides was in the power. In 87, it was kind of a tractor. In 88, they added the same new Kawasaki power valve system to the 88 motor. Also went with a new long rod design that gave it more of a hard hit and a stronger pull. The bike was one of the fastest motorcycles in the 250 class in 1988. Really a rocket ship of an engine. Thing was fast. The new cartridge forks were a huge improvement. Like I said, night and day better than 87. The new chassis was green like on the 125 and featured all new geometry and such, but the bike, like I said, was actually a pretty decent handling motorcycle. It just felt big and bulky. If you were probably a big guy, you probably liked it better than I did. I'm only 5'8", so short little legs. The thing felt big and wide to me. Didn't really care for it the way it felt, but there was no denying the thing was fast. Rounding out our 1988 Kawasaki Retrospective is the big daddy of the 500 motocross class, the KX500. Now, the KX this year got all the benefits, or at least most of the benefits that its smaller brother got. It got an all-new chassis, painted green, lovely green. Also got the new cartridge 43mm forks, redesigned Unitrack, all new bodywork. Like the 250, this tank design, seat tank, was much wider. This seat's kind of a big marshmallow. It was real soft, very wide at the tank. Made the bike feel kind of bigger and heavier than it needed to be. I mean, no 500 is really svelte, but CR in 89 was much thinner than this bike was. Now in 88, the Honda was using an old design, so it really wasn't as big of a difference. Like I said, a big bike. People kind of expect a 500 to be a big bike, so it's probably not a huge deal, but when you sit on an 87 versus an 88, it was a pretty big difference. Now, the chassis, like I said, was new. The motor was slightly redesigned, not a major revamp. It added a few different porting specs that changed the piston to a domed piston style. It did not get the center port exhaust Kips valve that the 250 and 125 got. But at the time, this was the only 500 from Japan that had a power valve. The Honda never got one, so this was still a much more advanced engine than what you would have found on the competition. The bike, pretty much a great machine. Good for several 500 titles here towards the end before the class was destroyed, and was the king of the desert for quite a long time. So an excellent motorcycle. Now this was the design that would basically be the KX500 for the next, I don't know, till 2004, I think was the last year. So there really wasn't a whole lot of difference. The only thing they really changed was some suspension tweaks. In 1990, it got an upside-down fork. And a few little differences over the years as far as shock settings and brakes and what have you, but the basic chassis, frame, engine, all this stuff basically stayed the same. This 88 was kind of when the die was cast for the next 15 years in Kawasaki KX500 design. So at least they got it right. It was an excellent motorcycle, and it was competitive in the 500 division till the very end. So definitely a great year for Kawasaki overall. The bikes weren't perfect. They had crap plastic. All the plastic cracked. All the nuts and bolts were junk. They all fell out or stripped out. The foot pegs drooped, the springs busted off. So Kawasaki had a few issues at the time in terms of reliability, but the performance was there. The bike was a good motorcycle for sure. I hope you enjoyed this. If you do, like I said, I'll do some more of these, either individual bike looks backs or kind of retrospective of the whole line, kind of like I did here. You can subscribe to me on Instagram and Twitter. That's at Tony Blazer, TonyBlazier. If, like I said, if you'd like to follow this kind of stuff, I post classic motocross photos and stuff every day online. And I hope to see you again. Peace.